Good morning and welcome to the Eclectic Radical. As always, I'm Chris Richards, your host, the Eclectic Radical. And with me today is comrade and colleague and friend of the show, Renee Johnston. Welcome back, Renee. How have you been doing?
Good. I'm good, Chris. Just trying to keep up.
Yeah, news is happening really fast, isn't it?
It really is. It's unreal.
It's almost
Unreal.
hard to know where to start. I think the two things freshest in my mind are Palestine and Cornel West is now an independent. But if there's anything fresher in your mind,
No, I feel like that's pretty fresh. I feel like that's pretty brand new. It's
and
it's interesting. And I wasn't able to catch Zaina's she did a live
she did it. Yes, she
on
did it
Twitter
to
yesterday. And
space.
did you get to listen in at all?
I should have. I do a lot of vegging out on the couch on Saturdays and
It's a
not
good
as
time
much
for vegging
serious
out.
stuff as I should.
I was actually trapped on a Metro North train with my son
Huh.
and afraid that my battery was going to die. So I was like, you know what? We're going to just not do anything that's going to cause more battery problems right now.
Well, that makes perfect sense.
So,
That makes perfect sense.
Yeah. It was an interesting journey.
I'll just go ahead and connect them both. There was a tweet the other day that really made it look like Cornel West was trying to sort of both sides the Israeli-Palestinian thing.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't quite use the word unprovoked, the way every member of Congress who tweeted about it did. Did you notice that every member of Congress or the Senate who tweeted used the word unprovoked about a Palestinian attack on Israelis? It's like,
I mean, I guess if you go up into the 5 or 6 seconds before it happened, if you narrow the window,
that's really the question: is where do you start the clock? Because I mean, in my opinion, almost everything, every act of, whether you want to call it revolution or terrorism, is almost irrelevant. Everything the Palestinians have done for a long time now has been provoked by the whole occupation thing.
Right. Which no one who ever goes into these conversations about what's happening in Israel and Palestine ever mentions. That, if you're on the side of, what is it, that Israel has a right to self-defense, but you fail to realize that they are defending themselves against a group of people that they've been terrorizing for decades. It's just, you're missing a big chunk of the story if you don't go back to how they got there.
Exactly.
Right? And how they've stayed there, not just how they got there, but how they've stayed there and the state that they have created for the Palestinians in that time. So, I feel like it's very easy for some people to say, oh, it's unprovoked. They have their right to their... Too much, too fast. Be careful. Yes. If you're only looking at this idea that, Israel is there and these people are living there and there are other people who are attacking them, and you never ever look at how they got there, why they're there, why they're still staying there, how they got the land that they got, how they got the houses they got, all the things that they do to keep the apartheid state going for the Palestinians.
All you have to do to understand that it's provoked is read any Israeli history of the 1948 war.
Right.
I mean, the right-wing Israeli historians are really, really proud of the ethnic cleansing.
Yeah. Yep.
And it's just hilarious that on the one hand you can have these histories of Israel by respected conservative historians that go all into all this detail of everything that was done, and then you have right-wing Israelis say, well, we're just defending ourselves. It's not provoked.
Mm-hmm.
No.
Mm-hmm. I don't know. I don't have a good answer for how to fix it, to be honest. I mean,
Well,
obviously I have no full understanding of how any of
so
this could actually be
it's
fixed.
like South Africa. There is no fix except for except for the people who are oppressed to eventually win.
Right.
I mean, I'm sorry that I realize a lot of people have all these sort of investments in Israel as a country, emotional and material and what have you.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
Israel as it exists now really can't continue to exist and still actually see peace in the Middle East. You've got to see that what's needed is a one-state solution with the Palestinians in charge, and then the Israelis can decide whether they want to stay or leave.
Right. I mean, that seems reasonable
I mean, it's
as an
like
outcome.
if people really push me hard enough, I would say the same thing about the U.S. and Canada. There's no solution to things in the U.S. and Canada that doesn't end up with the white constitutional settler state being overthrown by an indigenous and black uh, anti-colonial state, and then people need to decide what they want to do after that.
Right.
And I'm sorry, I don't care if that bothers other white people. That's the facts.
Nice. It's perfectly reasonable to me, but
There was
I'm a reasonable person, so
I now the organization that put it out has all sorts of problems that leads me away from endorsing them as an organization. But there was a great essay by a Canadian communist group about how the indigenous people of North America, Black Americans, and the working class need to get together, throw the rich white people out, and let people decide what they want the country to look like and
right.
how they want to organize their communities. And that's honestly one of the best arguments I've seen. You need some sort of indigenous self-determination.
Mm-hmm.
You need genuine black self-determination in America.
Mm-hmm.
And the working class needs to be free of the landlord and the boss. It's pretty straightforward.
I mean, it should be. It should be. It should be, but it obviously it's not, and
Claudia,
obviously because we're living in a place where the people who are in charge are
yes.
wedded to the capitalist system because that's what allows them to be in charge.
And by being wedded to the capitalist system, they also wed them, or by being wedded to these other systems, they also wed themselves to capitalism. Let's remember it goes both ways. But by wedding themselves to capitalism, they're also wedding themselves to all the baggage of patriarchal and colonial white supremacy, all the way back to the very early parts of European history. And that all the problems stem from those things systematized together.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, although I guess there's so much that comes with that to just say, yeah, it's so way more like complicated.
It's true, but I mean, if you're going to try to be, if you want to try to have a theory of everything, a sort of political unified field theory, if you will, you've got this demarcation between what I would call legitimate authority used by communities to organize themselves and take care of their members, versus all these kinds of illegitimate authority used to build power at the expense of the rest of the community.
Right. That is actually really very true. I mean, It's about as concise and as simplified as you can make it, in a way that if that one thing could be addressed, so much more would be fixed. If we weren't constantly moving within community circles that were where everything that affects the things within that community is decided by and put in place by people who do not live in that community.
Yeah.
You're right. There'd be a whole lot of change that came with that.
Then you've also got the new YIMBY model, where you take over the community, and you say, yes, we'll do everything right here in the community. It's going to be great. And what actually happens is you have two tiers of life in that community, one very good and one very bad.
Mm-hmm.
And the people who are doing well are constantly trying to push the people who aren't doing well out and calling the cops on them and a whole bunch of other things.
Right. Or they just push them all out completely and
yes.
take over the community, and what used to be becomes something totally different because the membership of that community is completely turned over to something new.
Yes, exactly. And that's basically that whole colonization happening in the internal system, where you're using these same systems to displace people all over again, because society is essentially under attack by its own leaders who've decided it's inconvenient for their needs now.
Right. And they make it so other people feel like they're also inconvenienced by these things, when it's really the power structure and the leadership and the capitalism and the money and the government. So Eric Adams flew down to Central and South America.
Oh my gosh.
Because why? I don't know. I think he really wants to be president. I think he wants to be president.
So I will tell you why he did what he did. And he did what he did for the same reason that Joe Biden sent Kamala Harris on the Don't Come Here tour just after he was elected.
Mm-hmm.
And it's because they have to create this illusion that people aren't so desperate that they'll do anything to get here because of how crappy we've made their parts of the world. And so you've got to make this illusion. If we just go and tell people how bad it's going to be when they get here, they won't come. And it's this very weird and strange idea that people somehow don't know how the U.S. treats immigrants.
Yeah.
This very strange idea.
People don't know. There are a lot of people who don't quite understand.
So when I say people, I'm not talking about people in the US even. I'm talking the people who come here from the global South.
Mm-hmm.
Know what to expect from the US to a certain degree, especially if they're coming here undocumented. It's not that they don't know how the U.S. is going to treat them.
Okay,
it's that where they want to get away from, for whatever reason, is worse.
Right.
It's usually our fault. And by our, I mean the U.S. government, not us. But it's usually the fault of the American state.
Right.
And so they make this argument, well, if we go down there and we talk to them and we explain, no, we really can't have that, somehow they won't try to come here. And that will justify, if we tell them how bad it's going to be, that will justify all the things we do to the people who actually try to come anyway. And it's this whole vicious circle where somebody goes down there to tell them on this notion that they'll stop coming. And then we escalate the cruelty because we've told people what to expect, and so we have to give it to them. And it just gets worse and worse that way.
Interesting.
But that's what we're getting. That's what they're locking us into. They're locking us into this "don't you dare come here" cycle.
Interesting.
It's going to be like it was in the. I mean, we're already worse than it was when Cheech made Born in East L.A.
Oh yeah, probably yeah.
I mean, the thing to remember is, for all the prejudice, the 80s was when amnesty happened, and Reagan told people they could stay. Not to praise Reagan too much, but
we're not ever going to do that.
But the 80s was when you actually saw broad amnesties, and it was actually a little better for people than it had been in the 70s. But then that got a whole lot worse again as people started getting reactionary in the 90s, and you started seeing this. You can't let people speak Spanish in California.
Right.
Like, that's so stupid. Telling people they can't speak Spanish in their own country.
Right. So, I agree, Jera. It is hard to believe people are that gullible. And I don't know that people are actually gullible as much as that people simply don't have time to learn about it, right? Like, regular, if all you have time for in your day is to jump on and watch your like little local news channel or whatever, you're never ever going to get the realities of how the US has completely like instigated almost every problem that exists internationally. So you have to make an actual decision that you're interested in finding that information and learning about it to even have any sense of being in the know that these things are happening. And a lot of people just don't have time for it. The other side of that is, people are also. So I had a conversation with a friend the other day, and we were talking about how in some school systems, because of this growth of non-English speaking students, they've been paying teachers more to teach the ESL programs.
Yes.
And so you have teachers who are leaving the regular school system, the regular school classroom to teach in an ESL classroom because they can make more money doing that. Yep. And so the initial conversation started out with, I mean, how crazy is this? Like, our own kids aren't going to get the stuff that they need in order to accommodate these students who are coming from other countries. And I said, so take a step back and consider that your reaction is exactly the reaction that they want you to have. They want you to look at this situation and think, how dare you take this thing away from my kids in order to give to these kids? What they don't want you to acknowledge is that your kids were already not getting enough. Mm-hmm. And that was intentional by the system to shortchange the schools, to not pay the teachers, to not take care of the staff, and so all of these things, so that when something like this, and then now when something like this happens, right? Of course, they're going to navigate to the thing that's going to allow them to get more and to make more, because the system was never set up to do that. If you live in a district where your teachers are making enough money, where they feel supported, where there's an actual ELL or ESL program that's already functioning and working in the city, this is not a problem. Right? This doesn't happen. You don't have teachers leaving the regular classroom to go teach ESL.
True.
But no one is taking that step back to realize that the system has set up this deficit, and now the system is doing a greater disservice to students in order to cover for a deficit that they created. So it's an interesting thing when you look at the amount of people who are like, all the things that they're blaming and saying, well, if they weren't coming here, and not understanding that them coming here was not the problem, right? They're coming into a place where there was already something that was not functioning well. that did not have appropriate resources, that did not, you know, if you already have, if you don't have homeless people, then a large group of people coming into your city that needs housing is not an issue for your city. It's only a city if you already don't take care of your people. So,
well, I mean, and on top of that, you have to remember that there is a national movement to replace public schools with Christian schools and corporate schools
and charter schools.
And well, that's what corporate schools.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
The corporate schools or the Christian schools are both usually charter schools in their excuse to get state money.
Gotcha. Yep.
I've been doing so much reading about this.
I know you
so
have.
Scary. Like the setup in Florida, Naples, Florida is the one I know the most about because it's where the intersection of a lot of the political stuff people see on TV hits the intersection of stuff that you don't know about. So Naples, Florida has a congressman named Byron Donalds. You may have seen him on TV. He's a really die-hard MAGA Trump guy who also happens to be a black guy. He was one of the people whose names they put up as a token candidate for speaker against Kevin McCarthy when they were doing their whole bully Kevin McCarthy into doing our will spiel that ended him in not being speaker anymore just recently.
Right.
So Byron Donalds is the congressman from Naples, Florida. He also used to be with his wife on the board of a big Christian charter school that sort of fell apart because there was an argument among the people who ran it over how right-wing and scary they really wanted to be. And he and his wife were, we want to be as scary and right-wing as possible, dang it. And so let's go to his wife then. His wife's name is Erica Donalds.
Okay.
She was on the school board for Naples. Okay. And she ran as one of these, the schools are failing, we need to get our kids into better schools candidates. Once she was on the school board, she started her own. So the Florida has a state school board organization.
Right.
That all the members of all the school boards in Florida belong to.
Right.
Bureaucracy, etc. Right. She starts her own conservative competing school board association to compete with the Florida State School Board Association, trying to get right-wing school board members who favor Christian schools to join her organization. Even though her first school failed, since then she has come back bigger and better and has successfully set up a small network of private Christian schools centered in Naples, but also in surrounding communities in Florida, which are getting state money under the system put in place by governors like Rick Scott and Ron DeSantis, have displaced actual public schools and are getting them. And so basically you're seeing this network of Christian schools sponsored by Hillsdale College, which is a pro-discrimination school in Michigan that stopped taking federal money so they could ignore Title IX.
I mean, the whole thing, first of all, Florida.
Now, I've learned about all this because Erica Donalds is on the academic advisory board of groups like Moms for Liberty and the Classics Learning Test group, whose CEO wrote all those op-eds about how great Ron DeSantis was and put Dr. Cornel West's name on one of them.
Yep.
So this is, all these groups come back together and all these people are connected to each other. There's this conference where they get Christians together just to talk to each other about replacing public school with Christian school. They do it every year. People like Ben Carson spoke there in 2022.
Oh, and he's a train wreck. Jesus.
I mean, and your idea of a serious speaker on the subject of public education in America is Dr. Ben Carson, who it's like, I don't like I don't like to speak this way about people, but you look at Ben Carson and you wonder, how did this guy become an award-winning neurosurgeon in the first place?
So have you ever, do you know his story?
I don't know his story as well as I should.
And Lord forgive me, I'm almost fairly certain that I'm not mixing him up with someone else, because there's a book out about his childhood. So if I'm remembering correctly, he grew up fairly poor in a single parent household, and his mother was illiterate. And one of the great stories of his childhood and how he became so intense about school and education was his mother used to have him read books and write book reports. And that's how she learned about books and different things, because he essentially was teaching her, and this was part of his growth. So his backstory of what he kind of, I guess, overcame, however you want to put it, to get to his place, right?
It's like the absolute best inspiration porn.
Right. Because when I tell you, when I first knew who Ben Carson was, before he turned into like this right-wing nut.
Well, and that's always the way it is. They always give you this great inspiration porn story about someone who then turns out to be this terrifying right-wing nut.
And I don't know when it happened, right? Like, I'm like, when did you go from being like the black guy who like overcame all these things and became a doctor and all, and now, you know,
I don't know if they're mutually exclusive though. Did you see when they showed his house, when one of the, I think it was MSNBC, did an interview with him in his home?
Mm-hmm.
Did you see his house?
No.
This is a guy who has a self-portrait of himself with Jesus. Now, in his defense, at least it's black Jesus. He doesn't have a portrait of himself with blonde-haired, blue-eyed Aryan Jesus. That's something.
Lord. But
the man has a self-portrait of himself with Jesus in his home.
Well, that would do it. That would do it. Yeah.
I mean, you can't always separate it's not necessarily a moment where someone became something. It's that people are who they are, and as you know them longer, you get to see more of them.
Yeah.
I mean, people do change in all sorts of ways. I don't want to pretend that people never change. But at the same time, there is a process in learning who people are. First, you become aware of someone and you know their story and you see what's on the surface. And then as you interact with them, or as they interact with the world, if they're a public person, more of them comes out.
Yep.
A great example would be all of the things that people found out about Bill Clinton after he was president.
Right. True. And I only knew who Ben Carson was because, you know, as you know me, I am that person. So when he first started to become known as a surgeon, it was when his, and I don't know if it's an autobiography or if it's a biography.
He wrote an autobiography.
The Gifted Hands book. That was an autobiography, I think. So
his autobiography is, again, his autobiography gives away the "God has blessed me so much" that can be a red flag for some of this stuff.
Right. And I guess because within so much of the Black community, that is a full-fledged like thing, right? Like God and the blessings and the gifts and.
Well, I mean, it's not like that isn't a thing in the white community too.
True. Fair enough. But I think my point was because it's such a large portion of so many different Black communities. In my reading it wasn't a red flag for me. Like when I read the book, I remember thinking, you know, I'm not a person who sees.
Yeah.
I'm not a religious person, and I don't see the world that way with the God blessing people thing. But I wasn't thrown off by it. Like I just was like, yeah.
I wasn't. So
Yeah.
It's not that it was that it's just that that's the thing that turns out to be part of the red flag in hindsight. Usually, maybe I should say, because when Republicans talk about somebody new, there's always a process.
Right.
The first step of learning about a new Republican isn't this such a great story? And the second step of learning about somebody is how he establishes how he's the same as other Republicans for Republicans to be comfortable with him, right. Which is always, I love Jesus. Mm-hmm. Usually, if not always. Mm-hmm. And then how he's different from other Republicans, which is always, sure, I'm conservative, but I care about people.
Right.
And then the last part of the process is you just find out they're just like every other Republican.
Right. Right. And there's some that are worse than others.
It's true.
I still, for the life of me, am unclear how the congressman in Long Island, I think it's District 3. Santos still has a job.
So
with all the things that have come out.
Fun fact. The only picture taken of me with Bernie Sanders, which is not me personally, but is a picture of a hand puppet held up next to Bernie Sanders speaking in the Queen's rally in 2020. Was taken by a nice woman from Long Island named Melanie Dariga.
Oh, yeah.
Dariga,
and
sorry,
she ran also for...
She ran in District 3.
Mm-hmm.
She ran in District 3 in 2020 and 2022.
Mm-hmm.
In 2020, the incumbent was a man named Tom Swatsy.
That's a name, huh?
Yes, he is Italian American for everyone who wondered.
Real quick, I'm going to go off camera because if I don't make my coffee, I'm going to become miserable. But I'm here, and I don't want people to see me fussing around my kitchen.
I understand. So Tom Swatsy was the incumbent in 2020. He had a leadership position in the Democratic minority at the time. He was a guy who was considered to have a political future in New York. He's pretty conservative. And Melanie challenged him in a primary, was really looked great. But because he had the machine, he was renominated, and he stayed in Congress. As a connection to current events, I'm pretty sure LaFonza Butler was running Emily's List then. And she made the decision to endorse a conservative Catholic incumbent who had made noises about being willing to compromise with Republicans on abortion before, over a progressive pro-choice woman. He won his re-election.
And I'm trying to, so back in 2020, I was actually volunteering with Brand New Congress, who has since fallen apart.
Melanie did get an endorsement from them.
She did get an endorsement from them. And one of the students who was in Long Island at the time was working with her campaign. And I feel like when things started to fall apart in BNC between the Black and brown volunteers and workers, I gotta say, I feel like Melanie and I came to a little bit of a head about this, but I'd have to go back into my notes to find out like what all exactly went on. And I really hope I'm not confusing her with somebody else, but I just, I have to go back. I don't want to speak too much on.
Sure.
I don't want to speak too much in her defense or against her without being clear on that.
I totally understand
on that thing, because I want to make sure that I'm clear on it.
But the reason I mention it is because she was running against SWATs, and and because she was running in Long Island, she had some positions that she wouldn't have had if she had been running anywhere else. Like, if you're running in Long Island, you really had to advocate for repealing Trump's federal property tax deductions, simply because Long Island is one of the few places in the country where property taxes are actually close to what they should be. And
Are they?
Almost.
Are
they're
they?
very
I feel
high.
Like they're really high. Yeah, okay. What they should be.
Property taxes being what they should
like
be, and wealthy people living in Long Island keep
yes. That is correct. Yes.
So because wealthy people live in Long Island, and because property taxes in Long Island are closer to what they should be than they are in California, where they are kept artificially low by Prop 13, for example. Even though they're high in California too, they're not as high as Long Island. She had to be in favor of repealing the property tax deductions, because basically you're telling everybody in your district that you're fine with them paying their property taxes twice.
Right.
And I understand things like that, even if at the same time I don't really think that the property taxes should be deductible. That was one of the few things Trump did that I didn't have a problem with, because it's actually a way rich people pay more taxes, which is what we supposedly want.
Right. And I'm not fully versed on the tax law for it. And I think the issue at hand for me, as someone who does pay property taxes.
Well, and that's really the problem, is there are lots of people whose houses are overvalued and who can't afford their property tax.
And also because of redlining and the history of how houses, are evaluated as property, you have people who are paying, not paying their fair share, or paying more than their fair share, because it's not equitable. So it's always the same problem with all of these, with all of these laws, is that, they put them in place, and of course they, in one way or another, they benefit or they're not a benefit to the right or the wrong people, because the law and the system itself is not equitable.
Well,
it's
exactly.
such a hard battle to fight when you're really.
If you change zoning regulations to allow more multifamily housing, then who has a bigger advantage? The guy building luxury penthouses, or the guy building affordable housing?
Right. And then also, if you are in a position where you can get a house where 2 or 3 families can live in the building at one time, but it's your family that you're sharing that space with. It's not really the same thing as like the conglomerate who comes in and buys up a bunch of spaces and is charging rent to everybody.
It's true.
It's so, and again, that it just boils back to the same issue of things just not being equitable, and really and truly the problem being that the system itself is built to keep things not equitable.
And the system itself is designed to have 2 tiers: the people for whom everything is always great, and the people whose labor and poverty sustains that.
Exactly.
Because when you start concentrating wealth, that means you're taking it away from somebody.
Right.
If you're concentrating wealth in the hands of the rich, that means you're taking it away from all the people who aren't rich.
Right. And then how do you fix that?
Well,
I mean it's like it's literally the never-ending circle of questions. Like, how do you
this is why the right to property was challenged so aggressively by Trudeau in the first place. Well, we're telling people they have a right to their property, but that's not an equal right. The people who own the most property have the most right to their property, and we're defending the inequality in our system. We're not actually becoming a republic.
Right.
And when you look at it that way, it makes perfect sense. We're trying to overthrow the monarchy. We're trying to overthrow the aristocracy. We're trying to say all men are created equal, because that's the same language the French Republic used that second time around. But we're protecting the property of the rich and the aristocratic in such a way that they stay the ruling class. And that's really one of the problems of a lot of these systems. It's why Haiti is in debt, because you just have to pay the slaveholders reparations,
right?
Which is what's so gross,
right?
Slaveholders pay reparations every time.
And I firmly believe that part of the reason that Haiti cannot escape all the problems that has been created for it is because it's where the first slave revolts happened. And they're still angry. I can't let that belief go.
Well, you're right. And I'll tell you you're right. And I'll give you examples from history. If you study American history, you can see clearly a delineation between the point where George Mason, who signed the Declaration of Independence in the Constitution, was demanding in the Constitution that that slavery be abolished along with the slave trade in X amount of time, saying that we could not possibly remain a republic. And keep in mind, this is a dude from Virginia. We could not possibly remain a republic if we keep owning people. Now, his grandson would be one of the people who seceded to join the Confederacy. That's a very short amount of time, right? And you say, well, what changed between the signing of the Constitution and, the Civil War? What made Southerners go from feeling really guilty about slavery to feeling really good and self-righteous about slavery? Well, Haiti. There's a whole lot of writing about abolition in the period between what the Haitian Revolution and the Civil War, where these Southern intellectuals who champion slavery show how scared of something like Haiti happening in South Carolina they are.
Very interesting.
And
this is why, just so you know, Chris, this right here and the amount of history is why I always enjoy getting on this show with you, because I learn something new every time.
But think about that, though. Really think about that, because again, 1780s Constitution. You've got people talking about getting rid of slavery. We hate slavery. We feel guilty about slavery. Thomas Jefferson, who nobody would really consider anti-slavery, still wrote a first draft of the Declaration of Independence that showed his racial guilt about slavery and tried to blame it all on George III. And he was told, no, you can't say that. You'll offend too many people. And so all these people with this great consciousness of guilt about slavery, their sons and their grandparents are self-righteous. Haiti is what changed it. Everybody was terrified. If we abolish slavery, it'll turn into Haiti. And it's this, of course, it's Haiti. Slavery wasn't abolished in Haiti until the slaves revolted.
Right. And that's the part of it that I always want, this fear, and it's the same fear that exists now, right? If we let the Black people get too much power and control, we're going to lose everything, right?
Well, it'll turn into Africa. It'll turn into Haiti. It'll turn into whatever.
Right. And I want people to be able to step back and understand that the Haitians revolted because they were trying to stop being slaves.
Yes.
Right? If you don't have slavery in Haiti, there is no need to revolt. Yes. And it's the same thing with
Haiti
protesting, and with when people get out in the streets and when they stand up, like, if you're not killing people, there's nothing to respond to.
And Haiti is where all the exaggerated fears of white genocide start. And Haiti is the only place in history where anybody can actually say, someone quote unquote killed all the white people. Now, mind you, that's really reductively stated and not 100% true. What they did was in the end, they killed the majority of the French planter class and bourgeois in Haiti, some 5,000 people.
Mm-hmm.
Because when the French tried to force Toussaint Louverture to reimpose slavery, the whole planter class and most of the bourgeois went along with them.
Right.
Now, who they didn't kill was Irish indentured servants, Polish soldiers in the French army who defected, and the descendants of Huguenot pirates who had all been disenfranchised by when France and Spain became allies, and who had nothing to lose by siding with the slaves.
Right.
This was a class war against slavery, and the people who were killed were the people who were on the losing side of the class war. It was not a quote-unquote white genocide.
Right. Right.
And also, you got to remember that the majority of the French people in Haiti at the time were the occupying troops,
right,
and a few merchants. Most of the true owners were absentee and back in France.
Right. Because that's what they do.
They lost their money, and that was one of the reasons that the French Republic sent a fleet, even though the Haitians thought they were fighting in the spirit of the French Revolution and the Republicans would be on their side.
Right.
And so it's all very, which is what happens when you support when you protect the property of the people who already have it.
Right. Against and protect it against and in the face of the people who are being oppressed.
Well,
and
in this
denied
case, the
basic
people were
rights.
the property.
Right. True. Very true.
And that's one of the things you have to remember when everyone defends property as a right under liberal democracy. You have to remember that when they first said property was a right, property included people.
Yep. Do you see that? Sorry. I always watch the chat. Chris is a walking encyclopedia. You really are.
I don't know about that. Sad thing is, I used to read the encyclopedia a lot as a kid. The encyclopedia was really racist, by the way.
That doesn't surprise me, and yet and still, I'm sure if I read through it now as an adult, I'd be like, oof. But my mother at the time was working. I don't remember which. She used to be a coder, and I don't remember which company she was working for. She used to send us with our father to Jamaica in the summers, and then that's when she'd take take classes, right? So she could try and finish her degree over the summer when she didn't have the children to take care of and the husband to take care of. And so she was a coder.
Yeah.
And we got a set of encyclopedias. And if I'm remembering correctly, and I'll have to call my mother after to make sure I'm not telling a lie on the story. I feel like our set of encyclopedias was like a hand-me-down from somebody.
That happens a lot. We had a 1950s and 1960s sets that my parents had gotten from their parents.
Yeah, encyclopedias are like a lost. That books in general are almost like a lost art, and it's unfortunate. And I've gotten myself back into buying physical books because I'd really gone to having all these ebooks, and I still have a ridiculous amount of ebooks that I'm not going to pretend that I left those. And I also have a lot of audiobooks because as I drive and at night it helps. And I am a voracious romance reader. I will. I'll tell you a little secret about me. Because
it's nice escapist stuff, and even if it is,
the world sucks, and
even if it is usually misogynistic in some way.
Oh, it's awful. It's terrible. Although I will say that my favorite romance author has a way of like making the women the heroines, which I really
so that's the thing, though. I mean, there's a formula to it,
right?
And if it's done right, it almost seems feminist, but it's still really not.
It's totally not. Totally not.
But the heroine is always this strong, independent woman,
right?
who learns that she just really needs to get in more touch with her softer feminine side, while the hero is always this really macho man who needs to learn that he needs to get more in touch with his softer and more feminine side.
It's hysterical.
While at the same time doing something macho and heroic at the appropriate point in the story.
I know. It's awful. It is. It's terrible, but I love her, and I will buy every book she ever releases and read it.
I'm curious. Who is it?
Kristen Ashley.
I don't know her.
Fantastic.
I was
She's
because of my generation. I read both Catherine Coulter and Iris Johansson, who eventually made a transition from writing romances with thriller aspects to writing straight thrillers with romance aspects.
Yes.
And
a little bit of that too. She
got a little bit of quote unquote literary respectability from that.
Yeah. She's actually she's written, I think she's got to be at over 100 books now.
Oh yeah,
a bunch of series, and some of it is like magic, and some of it is ghosts, and some.
Yeah.
But she does the due diligence of, like, when she writes about a place, it's because she's been there, and when she writes about people, they're like this hodgepodge of people she's actually met in real life.
Yep.
And during COVID, she got in a lot of trouble because she spoke out a lot about police violence, about George Floyd, and people were like, why are you talking about this? And she was basically like, then stop buying my books. And I was like, let me find out you're my new favorite author. I was like, let me find out you're my new favorite author.
Well, it's like,
she's great.
It's like there's something in The Stand, and it's not popular to admit that Stephen King is smart these days because he's such an obnoxious liberal. And I understand that.
Awful, but I love him too.
But there's something in The Stand where it's really profound, where he's the main characters are talking about government and stuff like this. Mm-hmm. And the New England college professor, Glenn, starts talking about presidents and says, except for Nixon, who thrived on power like a vampire, and Ronald Reagan, who just seemed too stupid to know what was going on around him, every president goes into office looking healthy and coming out looking like they're going to die. That you can see the job of the president just drain the life out.
Absolutely. Yeah. And she does that too. She has a book about an English teacher who is teaching her class, and I'm going to blank, To Kill a Nightingale. And she talks about, like, as a white person, you have to be courageous in the face of like, these are the things that are kind of woven into her books. She's a brilliant writer, in my opinion. And it's just, for me, I can't, if I spent all, like, the stack of books, just so you know, so this is like my life right now, right? This is me trying to get through. I don't know if the camera can, I think with my Zoom, hold on.
It's pretty blurry. I saw it.
I'm going to take off the blur temporarily.
Yeah, there we go. End of policing. Like, I see that.
This is me.
Blood in my eye. Yep.
This is me literally, like, trying to catch up on all the books that, like, the stuff that has been on my brain to read. Like, this is like, like, if this is all you do, like, you're like, you can't. There's no.
Yeah, you have to ebook it sometimes.
Yeah. So
I admit that I am reading right now, and I'm reading it digital. And I'll admit I'm reading it digital because I got it instead. I got it as a well. Circle back with us later again for another media inquiry. But here, have a rush of the book so that you can read it and talk about it. And so I've been reading Extremely Online by Taylor Lorenz. The history is important, and in any way you do anything in social media to promote yourself or other people, it's really enlightening. But what it comes right down to is that from the very beginning, people who had enough money to get agents were dominating content creation on social media. And it's not something that we really think about these days.
Yep.
But from the very beginning of content creation being a thing, the people who were becoming successful and making money were getting agents before they really had any right to. The first person who really broke through basically just decided they wanted to be famous and decided to make themselves famous.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the birth of our whole influencer thing. And on the one hand, I agree with the judgment of the book that a lot of the misogyny and gatekeeping that she encountered was really vicious. But at the same time, it's like, how many of us have the ability to just decide to be famous and then do it?
Right.
I mean, that requires that she be able to spend the time promoting what she's doing instead of, working for a living like the rest of us.
Right. And it's tricky, right? Like, so when I did we'll go speak to Twitter, and so I gotta make sure I watch the time because we're gonna do some family stuff, and I gotta make sure I'm not taking up too much of the afternoon. But
of course,
I've got a little more time still. No, I'm not rushing off yet. And I want to make sure that we get to Dr. West and his announcement, because that's a huge thing that I'd like to talk about. But
agree.
When I posted about the Saturdays with Jared, and you were like, "Oh, I could have moved my show to Saturday," and I was like, "Chris, don't do that." So, like sometimes timing is everything, right?
Yeah.
Like it was a random,
I know,
like the random Saturday that like I couldn't do the mornings anymore because I have a job, right?
Yeah.
And I had been jumping on EYL on Friday morning sometimes, and jumping on a remix sometimes.
Plus, your job is in academia, so it's
right.
during
And
the school hours.
Right, it's during like I literally at 8:00 in the morning, I'm like on my way into my office, and I literally have kids in and out of my office all morning. All day, honestly.
Yeah.
And so Jared, when he sent me the note, and he was like, "Could you do a Saturday?" And I was like, "I could do Saturday this week. Sure, no problem." And then we get to talking, and we're like on the show talking live. And people in the chat are going, "You guys should do this, right? You should do this more. Like you should have more Saturdays. This is great. The time is great. Everything's great." And Jared's like, "Well, can you do more Saturdays?" And I'm like, "I probably could do more Saturdays." Like, sure, I could do more Saturdays. It was such a random.
Well, it doesn't shock me though, because I get positive feedback every time you're on the show. So,
oh, well, I appreciate that. And so, it was like timing was everything. And you sent the note, and I thought to myself, it would have never, if it hadn't worked out that way, like saying to you, "Let's do a Saturday," would never have even crossed my mind to tell you, like, "Let's do Saturdays. Saturdays work better." But it's been, those they've actually been pretty well viewed, which is still shocking to me. But I said to my husband, I was like, I make sure that I work Chris in on Sundays, because it's like I don't want him to feel like I don't love him.
I know you love me. I'm not. I don't feel unloved.
So, but Sundays are a little trickier. But I think I could actually do every other Sunday, and then we can go kind of month by month and just see.
Sounds
like
good.
How it works, and if you can work somebody in on the alternate Sundays, and then we can try and keep a regular schedule if you think that's going to be helpful.
Oh, I would love that. Because I will be honest, I work best when I have somebody I can talk to. If whoever else's schedule can't show up anyway, I hate having to cancel shows.
Yeah. I always hate when I see like I'm not going to do a show, and I'm like, you can't do this show. But I mean it. Like, I feel like, just like somebody said, I feel like you have so much information, like kind of just floating around in your head, that people need to know about, and it bothers me that more people don't watch your show, right? And I feel like you should have more of an audience than you
I
do.
know why I don't, though. And
Okay.
that's and I'm not going to change it. And so I'm always going to have to try to work around and past it. And the simple fact is that I don't have an audience because, number one, and I don't mean this in any sort of a negative way, it's just a marketing fact. Because I am a relatively, I do not have an identity. I cannot market my identity unless I want to market my identity in bad ways, being a white guy.
Gotcha.
So I can't. Capitalism likes identities. We can talk about how important identity politics is to a revolution, but capitalism likes identities, and the only way to market mine would require me to move against the things that I would prefer to talk about. So I'm not going to do that.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna debate Nazis or have the white genocide people on my show. I'm sorry. No.
Well, thank God for that.
I'm not going to have anti-vaxxers on my show and start talking like I'm Robert Kennedy Jr. for clicks because, again, no.
Yeah.
I'm not willing to compromise the integrity of the show to do things that would be more commercially viable.
You will always have me.
I appreciate that. And instead of choosing sides in the kayfabe beefs, I have a tendency to tell the truth about both sides who are beefing.
Yeah.
But people don't like that. People want you to choose sides.
Yeah. Yeah. And we've talked about it. I know, there's some things that it's so tricky when you're having these conversations with people who are super passionate and emotional about things, right? So it gets.
Well, I am. That's me. That's not part of the problem.
It is, and so I try to, and this is definitely the counselor brain in me because I've discovered that my I don't want to say training as a school counselor because it's not really the school part, it's the life, like the 20-something years as a school counselor that has allotted me the ability and the space that when I see that someone is really emotional and upset and attached to something, I kind of just step back and let them live that, right? You don't always have to, I don't have any need to argue with people about things that they're super passionate about if I don't fully disagree with them, right? If I see your point, I understand your point, and even if I don't agree with your point, I'm not going to argue with you about it if it's not something that I'm not completely against. Do you know what I mean?
I'm learning to be better at that. My problem is I learn by arguing. that sort of Socratic thing taken to maybe an unhealthy extreme, but I learned by arguing and debating and hashing things out. And a lot of times I change my mind because of arguments, even if it doesn't seem like I'm changing my mind during the argument. I look over the argument and I think about what people are saying, and I'm like, okay, that makes sense. I'm going to be a little more tolerant of this and see.
Yeah.
And I was really close. This is a good segue. This is the perfect segue to Dr. West.
Oh, good.
I was really, really, really close to being where I was going to say, you know what? I could almost support Dr. West despite all the concerns that I raised before. And then two things happened. He suddenly made another sudden party switch. And he issued that weird statement, both sidesing the Israeli,
which I think if I saw properly, I think he's trying to walk that back a little bit, but it's too late. And I'm seeing a lot of people who are like, here they come attacking Dr. West over this one thing.
At the same time, I've also seen people who are saying, oh, this is clearly Peter Dow's influence on Dr. West, and being very clear.
That too.
And I don't know what I think about that one way or the other.
Me neither.
I will say, and I'm sorry to everybody who's watching the show who just worships Dr. West. I understand. But is it just me, or does Dr. Cornel West seem very influenceable?
I mean, that's what that's been my I'm like, the whole changing
Because he ran
based on other people's advice.
Yes, he ran for president in the first place. And let's not forget this, because even though I don't like to give too much air to some of the people, he ran for president in the first place because Nick Brana of the People's Party asked him to.
Right.
He did not say to himself, I'm going to run for president. Here's why, and here's how I'm going to do it. Mm-hmm. He spontaneously decided to run for president because a bad actor asked him to do so.
Right. And he was third on their list, just an FYI, I like to point out.
Yeah, because we saw the attempts to get Jimmy Dore that didn't work in real time.
And then it was Chris Hedges in between.
Yes.
Who, funny enough, turned around and then moved him to the Green Party.
Yes. And then Chris Hedges steps in, influences Dr. West, moves him over to the Green Party. Mm-hmm. So again, we're seeing an outside influence. Dr. West didn't say, hey, I don't like these Nazis that Nick associates with. I'm going to go over to the Green Party. He was influenced by Chris Hedges the same way he was influenced to run in the first place by Nick Brana. Mm-hmm. And now all of a sudden he's running as an independent. The reason being given is ballot access and signature thresholds and money thresholds and things like that. Mm-hmm. And I get it. Mm-hmm. I understand why the campaign team believes that meeting one threshold once is better than meeting thresholds twice in some places.
Right.
At the same time, you had a whole lot of Green Party people who were going out of their way to say, oh, yeah, he's a Green now, he's with us, who now look really bad. Mm-hmm. And who know they look really bad. And have you read some of the stuff that the people for Cornel West have been tweeting on their account about how they really need to reassess whether or not they're going to support Dr. West?
Right. And this is the problem. And this has been the problem from the beginning with jumping on board with anything because of the person. Right. And so I didn't join the Green Party because Dr. West said he was going to run under the Green Party. And now I have a problem. Right. I upon moving and changing states, I joined the Green Party. And so I've been somewhat inactive with the New Jersey Greens, but prior to all of this stuff happening, I had become more active. And now that he's made his decision, like it has no bearing on what I'm going to do. I'm going to stay in the Green Party because I actually respect and like the people who are running the New Jersey Green Party. And I feel like they're sincere and wanting to do things that are better for everybody. And I don't know if it's going to work at all, but I do think that they're making a sincere effort to work within the community and to do things, right? And
as near as I can tell, the New Jersey Greens aren't weirdo anti-vaxxers or weirdo TERFs like some of the other state Green parties, so that's always good.
That is correct.
Our mutual friend Justine in Maryland won't have anything to do with the Maryland Greens because of they have some COVID deniers in their ranks.
Interesting. Huh. And I don't know anything about that in the Maryland Greens.
And then there are several TERF Green parties in the South.
Well, yeah, that I knew because there was a whole fight in Georgia.
Yeah.
But so, regarding Dr. West, my questioning of his running has always been the same question.
Yeah.
How are you going to do it? And why are you doing it? And until I get like an appropriate answer for those two things, like I can't jump on that bandwagon. And I got to say, I have never been happier to be a person who does not jump on bandwagons as I was when he made that announcement.
Yeah.
Because all I could think to myself was, imagine if I had been a person who just kind of got excited and went along and didn't do what I always do, which is question everything, right? Like, I'd really be sitting around right now like, oh, well, that didn't go so that didn't go so well, did it? Right? And people are really not happy with me because I was right. Right? Like, I mean,
well, I mean, there are still some very enthusiastic people, some of whom we know very well and like and respect very well, people we consider friends,
right,
who are still completely on that train.
and they can be.
Yeah.
You know, I've never. I mean, and I'd have to go back and watch every single thing I said, but I'm fairly certain that I've never been like, oh, he shouldn't run, he's terrible.
Yeah, no.
Da, 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 da.
I mean,
like,
so
it's never been the point. The point has always been, how is he going to navigate a system that is actually built to prevent him from making change? How is he going to navigate that system toward actually making change? And if he cannot navigate that system towards actually making change, how can regular people utilize the things that he's bringing to the table in order to work towards actual change within their own community?
There are also, and you know, he's put some of these things to rest, but some things don't ever completely go away. They're just the little tiny red flags. The one that sticks out to me the most, because this is just something, maybe it's because I'm white and I have such strong feelings about being against certain kinds of white people, no matter what. But it really bothers me that during the whole Charles Murray speaking at colleges things, he signed a letter defending Charles Murray and criticizing the students protesting Charles Murray speaking at their school. And he seemed to think that academics have a right to speak without being shouted down because they're academics, no matter what, and that student protesters shouldn't be shouting down Charles Murray, even if he is a horrible racist.
Right.
And that bothered me some.
Right.
It still bothers me some when I had forgotten it at one point, and then when I read it and was reminded, it was, oh yeah, I remember how disappointed because it's like when Noam Chomsky signed the anti-cancel culture letter a couple of years ago now. It was the same thing. It was like, don't they know anything? You don't stand up for the free speech of the Nazis. They're not going to stand up for your speech.
But we always fall for it. Not we, but people always fall for that, right? They always fall for that. I'm sorry. I'm actually, my event that's on Tuesday, I just got a text message from someone asking me to send them documents. So I don't mean to be distracted while I'm live with you on the show. But people always fall for the flim flam. Well, we have to do the bigger thing and we have to work together and we have to, and we don't. We literally do not. Like I have no desire, no interest, no.
I mean, when bipartisanship becomes an end in and of itself, then you get what you got during this whole Kevin McCarthy debacle, where people are criticizing the Democrats for not bailing McCarthy out. It's like, it's even, I'm not a Democratic partisan. I'm not a Republican partisan. I watch the antics in Washington with the eye of someone who intends to satire all of it anyway.
Right.
But the Democrats don't owe Kevin McCarthy shit.
Exactly.
That's not how partisan politics works.
Right.
If somebody wants something from the other party, you offer them something.
Right.
If you want the other party to save your ass and stay as speaker, you offer them some sort of concession.
Right.
The problem is, of course, is that he wants to still get votes from MAGA people in his primary.
Right. So he's got to walk that line very, very carefully.
And so he doesn't make those concessions. So then people start criticizing the Democrats for not saving him, as if Kevin McCarthy is somehow so preferable to MAGA.
Right.
I mean, we talk about, one of the things that comes into my mind a lot is how narrow these subtle differences really are.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, we have to have Joe Biden or we'll get Trump.
Right. But you actually, and so I have this argument with people all the time about Trump versus Biden.
Mm-hmm.
And I refuse to concede that Biden's better, although I realize why people concede the point.
I refuse to concede that Trump is better too, to be fair.
Well,
because I see them as clones.
I don't concede that either one of them are better.
I agree.
My belief on it is there has been nothing that has fundamentally changed as it changed from Trump to Biden that has made a significant difference in the material conditions of regular people. And
if you were a kid in a cage, it's worse.
Right. And if you can always find the anecdotal thing, this one thing that one did that the other didn't do, or whatever have you. But I'm talking systemically on the whole for regular working people. Everyone's still a mess.
Well,
right,
and people,
nothing's got.
And people talk, like we've somehow saved lives or protected marginalized people in some way by electing Joe Biden instead of Trump. And I'm like, how?
Right.
I mean, the first thing that Joe Biden did before Inauguration Day was get on a conference call with the NAACP and use language about they're kicking our ass all over the place with it. I mean, imagine that. You're using the language of violence to describe the political reaction to people who are saying, please make the cops stop using violence against us.
And it's so, and I'm going to have to start to wrap up. So this is actually a great segue into the last thing that I wanted to make sure that I said to you out loud. So this cop killing thing, right? I don't know if you noticed how many abolition books were in that stack, right? Because I kind of went on this mission that I really wanted to backtrack and read.
I don't know. You've noticed I'm running a lot of shows about cops lately.
Yeah. And what I'm learning in all of these things, especially in just my own desire to understand fully the history of abolition, is how propagandized we really are about police and policing and what the role of policing is. And so I can't remember, did you read the article that I got published in the Jersey? So in writing that article, I fell down a real rabbit hole. I mean, a serious ass rabbit hole, looking at city populations and who has cops and who doesn't have cops and all these things. And it was really eye-opening to me to see actual data, right? Because you can't find that chart that's in that article. The reason I put that chart together is because it did not exist. There was nowhere that I looked where you could see an actual comparison between cities of similar size, where the real difference was in how many Black or brown people lived there, and what that difference in Black and brown people did for how many police lived in that area, right? It was I was blown away. And that chart is only the 4 cities that I felt like I wasn't going to have people say, well, what about this? Right? Did you consider this as the factor for why there's more cops? Right? I picked the ones that were so in line that you couldn't miss the comparison.
And yet, are the highest crime rates in the country?
Right.
Bessemer City, Alabama.
Right. And so my next article that I'm going to start working on in line with this event that I'm doing, which is the thing that I want to make sure that I mention, is going to be about what actual crime is.
Yeah.
Right. And getting people to understand that what they think crime is also based on the propaganda of what is sold to them about what it means to be a criminal, right?
The best example is this media panic that's still ongoing now, even though it was proven in real time when it started that it was fake. But the media panic about shoplifting and smash and grabs, and they're taking stores out of Chicago because they're losing too much to theft. No, they're not.
No, they're not.
No, they're not.
Mm-mm. No, and all those things, all those stories about how the shoplifting and all those things that turned out to be false, right?
But they're still going on with that narrative. They're merging it with fake language about the police having already been defunded.
Right. Right, which is also a lie.
Yes.
Right? Because police now they have more money than ever, I think. And the
lie,
the preparation of cop cities and all these things that are coming into play that as I watch it happening in real life, I'm not taken aback because that's what the system does, right? But I am a little thrown off by how many people still don't understand how propagandized they are. Does that make sense? Like
yes.
when you say to somebody like abolition and they say, well, what do you do with the criminals? And I say, okay, but who's doing anything about the criminals now? Right?
Yeah,
Like who's doing anything about the real criminals now?
But there's this whole belief that somehow cops are holding it together and it would be worse without cops.
Right. Exactly. So I'm going to put this up, kid. I'm going to share something with you in the private chat. And if you don't mind pulling it up for me so that we can share it with your audience. So this is my next event that's coming up. And I don't know if Thursday night, if you can jump on the virtual so you can kind of watch what's happening. But one of the things that people, along with this idea, this misunderstanding of what crime is, and understanding the story of the Pendleton 2 and what happened with the Pendleton 2 and how they both had over 100 years added to their sentence in their effort to prevent correction officers from killing another inmate. Right? Like this is literally what happened. They did something to stop a murder and they both got over 100 years added to their sentences. Right? And the conversation surrounding their story is not happening. And it's fully aligned with how the system works, right? You have people who are sitting in jails because they're waiting for the system to work, right? Or to not work is probably the better way to put it. You have people who have there's everything about their story has made it very clear that they're not there for something that they actually did, but the system works against getting people out, right? If once you get in, it's like this fight to get out, even when everyone knows you didn't do the thing that they said you did. So one of
the details for everyone.
Yeah, so we're gonna be in the hub in Orange, New Jersey. So if people are in Jersey and they can come live, fantastic. I'd love to have like a little bit of an audience there. But I'm gonna do a virtual Zoom. Kalanji Changa, who is part of the Black Power Media, he's one of the co-founders of Black Power Media, is going to be one of my panelists. I still don't know if he's going to be live or not, but he's gonna replay the Zoom for me on Black Power Media at some point.
I'm assuming these times are Eastern. Is that correct?
That is Eastern times, correct.
I thought so, knowing you're in New Jersey. Yeah. So just so you have an idea of my availability for something like that, I would love to be there, but I get off work at 7 p.m. Eastern time.
Okay. So the screening, the panel won't start until about 7:30.
Okay, so I might be able
to. So
if
you can jump on for the panel just to listen, that would be great. But I really want people to start having these real conversations about what the system does to people, right? And how the system is not set up to actually prevent or to fix crime, or even to solve crime, right? Like the system, it's not about that, right? And so that's what I really I want to have these conversations, because when you have a system that is built specifically for the purpose of making money and for saving rich people their property and their money, everyone else can't, no one else can survive that system, right? You simply cannot survive that system. So I just want, I wanted to make sure that I had you share that on the show. I'm really excited because one of the panelists is Leon Benson, who actually served 25 years in the Indiana system for a crime that he did not do. He's been fully exonerated. And the beautiful thing of his story is the two gentlemen who are still in prison were part of what helped him while he was there. And the person those two people saved, who has since passed, but was a person who helped him with his fight to get out. Right? Like he had a personal experience that was completely directed by this thing that they did. And when he said yes, we had a whole conversation. And when I hung up the phone from him and realized the intensity of that, right? That he was able to fight his battle, and it took 25 years, because that's what the system does to people who are wrongfully convicted. But if those two men were not who they were, he might still be in there. And the understanding of that was really, I cried after I got off the phone with him, because I couldn't believe, like, being a part of something like this, like being able to bring him to be a part of something like this was beyond the beyond for me. And then I got to notice that Two Black, who is one of the directors for the movie, is also going to be on the panel. So it's going to be a fantastic panel.
That sounds great.
And I'm really excited to do the story. And for people who can't join, the documentary is available on YouTube. It's free to watch on YouTube. Anybody can watch it. And if people can just join for the panel after, I would suggest watching the documentary on your own. If you can, it's about 1 hour and 10 minutes long, and then jumping on for the panel if it's available. And then we'll re-show the panel on BPM at some point in the future, because Kalanji said, he was open to doing that. He actually suggested it. But my real goal in this is I want to help the defense committee that's been set up on behalf of the Pendleton 2. So I'm going to try and raise some money while we're on, try and get people to sign the petitions. I'm going to bring addressed envelopes so people can write letters, and really try and do something that's going to support the fight to get them out, right? Because that's really what's the crux of it. That's what's important. So thank you for letting me share that, because that's
always glad to promote stuff like that. I think it's important. I'm glad that there are people still doing real activism. I want to give that as much uplift as possible. Folks, the link is in the chat. Here it is again.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing it.
And thank you for coming on the show, Renee. I really appreciate it. I know you've got to get going.
I do. I'm on my mark. I'm almost over the limit, but I think this is good.
You have a great day.
You do the same. And we'll plan to circle back 2 weeks from now, okay?
All right. Sounds good.
All right, cool. Thanks a lot, Chris. Thanks everybody for joining. Have a good one.
And folks, I do appreciate everybody joining us. I do want to go ahead and just finish up by saying that things are happening really fast right now. We're going to see things get worse before they get better. And I want to bring this up because The difference between the old line conservative order and the Nazi regime is that even if the old line conservative order wins the election, it will still ask the Nazi regime to take its place if it thinks that it can profit by doing so. Hitler never won an election. Hitler was put in power by the old conservative order because they were afraid of communism. It's not enough to win elections. We have to fight against fascism. The state is not going to do it because fascism serves the same interests of capitalism that the state serves, and the state would rather compromise with fascism than with socialists. It's just the facts. The fundamental core of fascism is anti-communism, and the fundamental core of the liberal state is capitalism. That's just where we are, which means that in the end, the liberal state and the Nazis will always be siding against us, and we have to organize for mutual aid and community defense. And that's my final thought for the day. I hope everybody has a great week, and I will tweet at you. So take care.